What was it that let you stand up here? And I gotta say, I don't know. The only thing I've ever done was what I thought I should do. The only thing that I've ever done, I knew I should do. When I think about the guys that I know that received this award, like Tommy Durkin, Lou Garippo, who was a great prosecutor and the kind of criminal court judge you want to appear before. Mark Martin is here. Mark's dad, Billy Martin, is probably one of Chicago's greatest lawyers. Bill and I were involved in a very significant matter together. And shortly after that, he appeared before the Judicial Inquiry Board that I have the privilege to serve on. And I've heard a lot of arguments in the United States Supreme Court, in the Seventh Circuit, in the District Court, in the Criminal Court of Cook County. And on that occasion, Billy Martin made the most incredible closing argument I've ever heard. George Spellmeyer, who's a pal, who's a great lawyer. And so I say to myself, you know, what the dickens are you doing standing up here? And maybe it's because I went to Fenwick. By the way, Bernie Judge was mentioned. I talked to Bernie at some length today. Bernie and I go back to the time when he was a freshman at Fenwick, or rather a sophomore at Fenwick, I should say. He transferred in his sophomore year from Leo High School to Fenwick. In fact, he had the audacity when he came to Fenwick to wear his Leo jacket. But he soon became a friar. He's in bad shape now, and I hope you'll pray for him. And I wasn't kidding him when, about 2 weeks ago, when I heard about this wonderful occasion, that I wrote him a little note. And I said, you know, you're the guy that John Henry Cardinal Newman talked about when he described a gentleman. That's Bernie Judge. Now, that's the kind of person that received this award, and now I'm getting it for doing just what I should have done and what I wanted to do. It's pretty amazing. I transferred to Fenwick, as John pointed out, from St. Ignatius. And normally, you know, when you transfer from one school to the next as a sophomore, you're kind of a fish out of the water. But I was lucky because at the time I transferred, and even before classes started, I was practicing basketball. And I had gotten to know a bunch of guys, like Latner, Ed Rigby, Dickie Beeman was our classmate. So when classes started, I'm a pretty comfortable guy. I didn't suffer that lapse of feeling, where's my old pals? By the way, the freshman team on which I played at St. Ignatius in 1958 won the city championship in San Francisco the same year Fenwick won it in Chicago. And all 5 guys that started on that St. Ignatius team in San Francisco got rides to the University of San Francisco and played with Bill Russell and Casey Jones, who won the NCAA championship in 54 and 55. One of them was the quarterback on a Holy Name grammar school team. So I've been lucky to be surrounded by really nice people, great people, people that I respect. But when I came to Fenwick, because I had this feeling of comfort, I did not expect on the second day I was there that I confront this small, young, tough-looking priest by the name of Father Myers. I have my 51 yearbook, and I encourage you to take a peek at some time. There's another one here. Father Myers was, I don't think they have it here anymore, the Dean of Discipline. And he approached me, unprovoked in my opinion, and gave me a little love tap to the side of my head. I don't know if Beeman was in the class at the time or not. It almost knocked me out of my chair. And Father Myers said one thing to me: Cummins, this is to remind you, you're not being taught by the Jesuits any longer. That also motivated me to start boxing. We used to call ourselves, and I checked with John to see if it's still true, that friars are, if you know the fight song, men of steel. And I think Dick Beeman would concur in this, and Rigney would if he was here. We felt like we were men of steel. And we were champions. And I don't say that with any sense of arrogance. For example, when Latin knocked me on my butt once and then reached down and pulled me up, did I know that he was going to win the Heisman Trophy? Yep, I knew that. That was Latin. When Eddie Brennan was working at Benson Rickson on Lake Street, Mill Park, and sometimes as an usher at a movie theater, did Dick Beeman and I know he'd be chairman of Sears one day? Yeah, we knew that. So with that kind of exposure, maybe that's the reason he's going to be here. Not because of anything special I did. When you want to talk about special, there are two people here that are special. There's a definition of hero that is often misused, but there are two of my heroes today. One of them is Duffy Clark. I love Duffy Clark. I was appointed representative. Duffy Clark, shortly after the murder of two white boys and girls at 51st and Peoria in 1971. I hadn't represented Duffy very long before I knew he wasn't at 51st and Peoria on the day in question, no more than I had been at 51st and Peoria on the day at question. It would not be appropriate for me to comment on what went on in that trial, a trial that lasted 10 weeks after two mistrials. But there are two of my daughters in this room right now, Anne and Shannon, who were 10 and 8 or 9 at the time. And I said, I'm bringing you to 26 in California. I want you to sit through one day of the Duffy Clark trial, because I want you to experience and see and live with palpable racism. Now you can almost understand it, because 51st and Peoria at that time was a racially changing neighborhood. Duffy Clark's mother was an activist in that community in a constructive way. Duffy was well liked by the father of one of the little girl who was Helene Navarro, who was murdered. Duffy knew Mr. Navarro, and Mr. Navarro, at least at the time that the trial, just before the trial began, didn't believe that Duffy Clark had done what he was accused of, and he was right. When the verdict came back after that 10-week trial, and that 10-week trial followed 2 mistrials before that, my heart was breaking. The most significant event in my life up to that point, whether it was helping to form the Civil Disorders Committee, whether sitting before Richard J. Daley and explaining to him that we could avoid the same thing, incident to the '68 Democratic Convention that happened in this city when Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and a couple of thousand people were locked out without access to due process. And Duffy Clark went to prison for 34 years. And as I said earlier, Duffy wasn't at 51st and Peoria, and I wasn't at 51st and Peoria. And when people said to me, how do you know that Duffy Clark didn't commit that crime? It's called servitude. There was objective evidence of it. I knew, except for certain activities that were conducted that later were characterized as harmless error, that Duffy should have been found innocent. We found the best polygraph examiner in the United States. He passed both of those tests, no qualification. But Duffy went to prison for 34 years, and his daughter, Tanya, who's sitting with him today, was born at about that time. And Tanya developed a relationship with her dad, and you'll understand why in a moment, that led to her now becoming a significant person in the juvenile justice system here in Chicago. I saw Duffy a lot after the end of that trial. I became persona non grata before the parole board. It was tough for me to sit before the parole board and go through that process without reliving with some anger and frustration the result of the trial of Duffy. Ultimately, Duffy was paroled after 34 years. A young woman, Dana Orr, was an associate at Sun and Shine, took over Duffy's cause and ultimately led to the parole. And I had made a promise to Duffy. I made a lot of promises to him. I failed in some. I promised there's no way he's going to get convicted. And that's part of the reason it broke my heart. But I also told Duffy, when you come home, and you're going to come home, you're going to come to work for me. And he did. Because here's what Duffy Clark did. Instead of being, pissed off about having been mistreated, about suffering some serious injustice, suffering some prosecutorial misconduct, suffering some judgments by a judge who was relatively inexperienced in the criminal law, instead of showing any recrimination or anger, Duffy, who had gotten his GED and then gotten 2 degrees while in the penitentiary, decided time to rebuild his life. He worked hard for me. He later worked for Dan Konasek and Amir Thomasby, who are here, and they can tell you the kind of guy Duffy Clark was. Duffy, you're my hero. And if there's a significant event in my life that justifies me standing here, it's the case I lost, Duffy, because it brought me to you. And there's another gentleman here who's also my hero. His name is John Nelson Wood. John Nelson Wood is now a commissioner of the discipline system for the state of Illinois. Let me tell you a little bit about John Nelson Wood. On March 20th of this year, I celebrated my 45th year of sobriety. I was an addict. I was a vodka addict. John Nelson Wood suffered from addiction at a point in his life. He tendered his law license. He spent time in jail. He risked his life as another undercover agent with the FBI in dealing with drug cases shortly after his arrest. John Nelson Wood then reached out, changed his life, became free of addiction, participated in the Lawyer Assistance Program, and is now a commissioner of the ARDC. You can read, the trouble with being from the West Side and Irish, said this to Paul Adams and Conisek. I said, I'm old, I'm a recovering drunk, and I'm Irish, and I know damn well I'm going to cry a little bit. John Nelson Wood is an example of recovery. He's the quintessential example of recovery. The Supreme Court of Illinois, who had to accept his willingness to surrender his law license because he had engaged in unlawful conduct as a cocaine addict, now embraces him as one of the leaders of the bar, as it should. Duffy Clark and John Nelson Wood maybe justify why I'm here. When I met Mr. Wood, I knew very well that this was a man who understood what recovery was all about. And not only that, I think it was yesterday or the day before, John, that you were in drug court telling his story. A lot of us, if we've done something inappropriate or suffered a setback, we don't like to talk about it. That's not John Nelson Wood. So you understand why I have these two heroes and why I cite them as maybe justification for being here. Paul Adams told me to keep it short, so I'm going to try to keep it short. But I want to reflect on something with you. Fenwick in 1948, 49, 50, and 51 was a place where you could feel like a champion. The United States of America in 48, 49, 50, and 51 was different than today. And what's distressing a bit, and I hope this will change, is that the racism that led to Duffy Clark's conviction and incarceration will ultimately be addressed in this country in a way that it should. It can't be endorsed, as it has been, implicitly by some of our so-called leaders. The Fenwick Bar Association and the friars that make it up are in a position to speak out on those issues, and I know we will. We've got a country now, it would have been unheard of that somebody would walk into a classroom in 1950 or 51 and shoot children. Something's got to be done about guns. But this isn't the place to get into that. I just say this. If I'm able to live a few more years, I want to do what I can do to try to address those things. And part of the impetus for doing that would be to look back and say, I owe Fenwick something. I owe our profession something. And there's still a lot more to do. I want to thank the association for granting me this favor. I want to thank those members of my family who were here. One in particular who really didn't get the proper introduction is Jimmy Daly, who will be going to his graduation at Boston College in a couple of weeks. Jimmy had a job lined up, but he passed up the job. He's going to Botswana in the Peace Corps. My daughter Shannon's here. Her son Jack just came back from the Peace Corps. These guys, Jimmy Daly and Jack Connor, they're also my heroes. If I ramble anymore, I'll offend my darling wife, who said, don't ramble, stick to it. Thank you very much.